Now, since this is all part of the Uttar Pradesh Expert Committee COVID-19 second wave component, so we are deliberating on the issue of the mucormycosis in the background of COVID-19 as of now. There's lots of news reports regarding these items currently. You must be hearing them too much nowadays. So mucormycosis is previously, it was known as zygomycosis, is a common life-threatening fungal infection. It will hit onto immunocompromised individuals, but it can hit onto immunocompetent if there is a trauma to skin or otherwise. It's an opportunistic infection just waiting for your immunity to go down when it will catch onto you. There is an intrinsic ability of this fungus to invade into the blood vessels. So this is a very special component of this fungus. Most common is the rhino-orbital cerebral mucormycosis. The most common, the most aggressive form of the mucormycosis that most of us know of. The major risk factor is an uncontrolled diabetes mellitus, may it be in India, may it be the entire world. This is the single most common factor which predisposes to mucormycosis. India being the diabetes capital of the world, if you see the entire spectrum, in Southeast Asia, the rise is almost 74%. Now, this is a huge populous area. So if you see the amount of people who will get diabetic, you may very well understand why mucormycosis is prepondering into this area. We are also the COVID capital currently in the world. We are contributing to 40% of cases of active COVID now. We contribute to nearly 20% of the COVID deaths now. So we are two ways capital now. Diabetes, second, COVID. Third, India contributes to 70 times higher data of mucormycosis in the world. That means if you take mucormycosis throughout the world, we are the harbingers for 70% of it. So we are also the mucormycosis capital of the world. So this is a triple agony that India has the dubious reputation of being the diabetes capital, the mucormycosis capital, as well as the COVID capital now. Now, this is a publication from Arnolik, famous teacher of ours, Arnolik Chakravarti, and Sir's colleague as well. Now, he points out to three major publications published in Microorganisms 2021. This is a very recent one. All of the series of mucormycosis in India points to diabetes as the major risk factor for rhino-orbital cerebral mucormycosis, ROCM it is called. If you look further, the major organism amongst this entire mucormycosis is for Rhizopus. This is the most common strain that you will find for mucormycosis in India. If you look further down, mortality-wise, if you see now, the worst mortality is with GI mucormycosis, which happens in neonatal. In a series of publications on neonatal GI mucormycosis, mortality was the highest. But if you look in all the type of mucormycosis that you may encounter, like ROCM, renal, cutaneous, pulmonary, GI, or disseminated, ROCM, you'll somehow find it is having a little lesser mortality compared to the other ones, despite being, so there is a range, if you see, from 30% to 50% range of mortality in ROCM per se in the Indian series. If you look into the pathogenesis, it will invade through the inhaled fungal spores, which are prevalent in the environment, and then it will migrate into the sinuses. And from the sinuses, it may migrate further up into the cerebrum, or it may even migrate into the respiratory tract. So this is how it invades into the system in immunocompromised patients or in patients who are having uncontrolled diabetes. So why diabetes is such nasty to have is because it will lead to reduced T lymphocytic response, but majorly it will lead to reduced neutrophilic function. Therefore, diabetics are more prone. So the moment your neutrophil function is down, you can be hit by mucor. Neutropenia is an important risk factor for mucormycosis in hematological malignancies, in immunosuppressants, on patients on chemotherapies, radiotherapies. These are all important risk factors for mucormycosis. So you have two spectrums. One is a spectrum with say transplant segment on immunosuppressants. The other is the diabetic segment. So in diabetics, the neutrophilic function will be reduced if it is an uncontrolled diabetes. In this other segment that I'm talking of, the transplant and the other immunocompromised segment, the neutrophilic function there too will be reduced. And therefore, both of them are such strong risk factors for the growth of mucor in individuals. So this is a nasty combination: diabetes, COVID-19, and mucormycosis. Now, why COVID-19 becomes so nasty in this scenario is because you have at-risk patients. You have patients who are either obese, who are diabetics, who are post-transplant, chronic renal, liver, kidney disease, or lung patients already taking steroids for X, Y, Z reasons. Then on top of that, you have COVID-19 respiratory ailments for which you will invariably give steroids to these patients. So they will lead to a steroid-induced hyperglycemia as an element. Steroids themselves bring immunosuppression to your patients. So there will be an added hit in the background of COVID-19. There are other elements like ICU care. There will be elements of mechanical ventilation. There will be elements of humidification. There will be elements of logistic issues in terms of manpower for care of these patients. There will be issues like infection prevention and control measures within this environment of the COVID ICU. Then there will be air quality index, because I said, and sir also said, that there are fungal spores which are there in the air. So if the air quality index of your hospital or the home that you live in is not good, you will be at risk of having mucormycosis. So if you look into pathogenesis, I'll just point out only on one thing: why diabetes and why diabetic ketoacidosis. You may be uncontrolled diabetes, but if you have ketoacidosis, so ketones that are present in diabetic ketoacidosis will predispose to the release of free iron, which is a fodder for the mucor. So the moment acidemic conditions prevail, the moment this happens, there will be release of free iron, and the mucor which is harboring there will tend to eat it and grow into that environment or in that setup of that individual. And it is an angioinvasive, so the moment it moves into a tree, it will invade into the vessel, lead to blockage, lead to infarction, lead to necrosis, lead to thrombosis, lead to perineural inflammation, lead to acute as well as chronic changes in that particular segment where this mucor is laden with. If you look into, again, diabetes, so I'm now spreading it into two specific segments. One is a patient with DKA, so the same fungus, and the other one is an immunocompromised patient. So for an immunocompromised patient, this fungus will go into the lungs. But for a DKA patient, it will go in, hit the sinuses. The same fungus will not go into the lungs for a DKA, but in an immunocompromised, it will go into the lungs. It happens because of these two receptors which I'm talking. There is overexpression of COT-H3 in the DKA patients, and then there is overexpression of COT-H7 in the lungs of immunocompromised patients. Why this fungus will specifically predilect to these paranasal sinuses is specifically because of this COT-H3 overexpression, and therefore it gets harbored and stuck up into these areas and will tend to grow there. Whereas for immunocompromised patients, it will not get stuck here, it will go down into the lungs, and therefore you may have pulmonary mucormycosis. So the same patient may not have both. So this is, I'm just trying to. Now the presentations for rhino-orbital cerebral mucormycosis, shortly called as ROC-M, is a unilateral headache, which is behind the eye, facial pain, eye swelling, proptosis, visual disturbances, necrotic lesions on the hard palate or the nasal mucosa, ENT symptoms like congestion, black discharge, acute sinusitis, epistaxis, and there can be systemic symptoms like fever. So you can have a florid picture of some of these patients like this. This is from the Lancet Infectious Disease 2019 publication. On the top left-hand corner is the skin or the subcutaneous or the cutaneous mucormycosis in a traumatic patient who is immunocompetent, yes, has mucormycosis. On the right side, that is on B, you will have orbital. Then further on, you will have again paranasal and rhino-orbital. Then further on, you have even on the segment, I think I'm not wrong, it is the D, necurrent purulent palatal ulcer and cavernous sinus syndrome on D segment. Then on E, you have a child who's intubated and has got an acute lymphoblastic leukemia and lethal outcome with rhinocerebral mucosis in this patient. And on the other, that is the F, you have a 52-year-old man with persistent neutropenia and post-chemotherapy sinusitis and skin necrosis. And the last one, you have the black eschar as a typical skin lesion in mucormycosis. It tends to become black because there is necrosis, there is angioinvasion, there is thrombosis, there is no blood supply. The tissues which don't have blood supply will invariably turn out to be black over some time. And if you look into radiological images, these are only pulmonary related images, which I am just projecting. You can have a reverse halo sign on. These are the ones. These are the characteristic lesions that you may find in this group of patients. You can have this one is the reverse halo sign. You have this, you have another one in this lung. You have a rapidly spreading day 1, day 8, day 15. You have a spreading lesion of mucormycosis invading into the entire lung segment. Then you have another one on the F1. You can find it is invading from the lung through the diaphragm, going right into the abdomen, close to the kidneys. So you can find it going from here. So it is invading into the tissues right across. Okay? And then you can have vascular occlusion on CT angiography. Here is the mucus, which is occluding the blood supply of that area. So you can have a florid and myriad presentation of these patients. So stage 1 for the rhinoorbital cerebral can be, it invades into the mucosa and the sinuses. Stage 2 will be the orbital. Stage 3 goes on to the cerebral. There may be more upgraded versions. This is 2012 publication, so maybe a more upwarded staging is available. So I came on to this, so I'm just presenting it. And diagnosis, the gold standard for diagnosis is biopsy. Biopsy, biopsy, and biopsy is the way to go. No matter how difficult it is to get the biopsy, how troublesome it will be to get a biopsy, you have to get a biopsy done. Tissue swabs are unreliable for diagnosis of mucormycosis. Okay? Direct microscopy you can do by 10 to 20% KOH plus routine fungal stains. Then you need fluorescent brighteners like Calcoflower or Bancoflower from Netherlands. You need some of these brighteners so that you can see them properly. Positive tissue cultures alone are not sufficient sometimes to make a diagnosis. This is important to note. And as such, there are no molecular biomarkers available. It will usually be a negative galactomannan, or a BDG also will be negative. So you don't have biomarkers to rely on. There are new ones like Malditov, which I think Dr. Rumi will touch upon. Histopathology-wise, you have these segments. You have the major differentiating feature or the confusion is going to be with Aspergillus. Now, Aspergillus is a septate hyphae, okay? Whereas mucormycosis is an aseptate hyphae, okay? But sometimes when you do a tissue biopsy, there will be folding of the tissues on that. So even a aseptate may look like a septate hyphae. And there comes the skill of the microbiologist to be able to differentiate between a septate and a non-septate hyphae. And therefore you need a trained microbiologist like ours, like Professor Rumi here, to help you out. So how do you differentiate? So on the left-hand side, you can see very thinner hyphae. On the right-hand side, you see a larger hyphae, which are between 6 to 16 micrometer depth-wise. But the width-wise is much more. And on the left side, you see septations, very, very, very evident. You see a dichotomous pattern which is happening. But here on the right side, you will see they are broader hyphae. It will be more like ribbon strands. There will be no septa in between. So this helps to differentiate. I just wanted to tell it because there will be so many in the audience who are non-microbiologists. So as a knowledge base, it should be there for all of us to understand this. Diagnosis is imaging. You need imaging, both CT and MRI, to detect the invasion, to detect the bone destruction and necrosis, to look into soft tissue involvements, to look into intracranial involvement, sinus imaging to look into the mucosal thickening, any changes in the air fluid level, any cavernous sinus involvement, and MRI obviously will provide you a better delineation of the blood vessels and the intracranial extension. So whatever is available, go ahead and do it. This is a whole diagnostic pathway given by Lancet Infectious Disease in 2019. It is relevant throughout the world for resource poor as well as for resource rich countries. So it is applicable to everywhere in the world. And I'm sure it is applicable to every center in the country as of now. Now it looks into all elements which I just enumerated, like you have to go for an early detection, you have to go for imaging, you have to go for a biopsy, and then you have to stage the patient. Then further on, you need to do sampling. You may go on for galactomannan, but they will not be majority helpful. And direct microscopy, direct biopsy is the answer if you really want to diagnose a mucormycosis. Further on, it goes on the approach. Now, the first line which I write is a multidisciplinary team approach. Unless this is there, you will never be able to handle a mucormycosis. So create your teams. It is high time that we will be receiving many more patients of COVID-19 and COVID-19 associated mucormycosis. So create your team as we have created in PGI because of the director's vision. And we have a very broad team of specialists dealing with this COVID-associated mucormycosis. So mainstay will be an antifungal therapy, which could be either amphotericin B, posaconazole, or isovuconazole. Early, it is not surgical intervention, it is early surgical intervention. And it is early and repeated surgical interventions, which have to be gauged not only by the surgeon, but also by repeated images, that you have to keep on doing them so that you understand that you have actually debrided the entire fungal invaded tissues. So you will have to keep on repeating these endeavors. One time may not be enough for mucormycosis. And diabetes control will obviously be the most important thing that needs to be done. You have to control diabetes no matter what logistic issues you are facing in COVID-19. You have to do this. And early surgical debridement plus antifungal therapy plus control of underlying risk factors, if possible, is the recommended truth for all of us. If you look into the which will help you reduce the mortality. So the answer is amphotericin B plus surgery in India, as per this data, helps you reduce the mortality. If you do only one, or if you do any other, without the two combined together, the mortality will not come down. So it has to be amphotericin B plus a surgery, which will help you reduce the mortality. And again, this is the diagnostic approach. You can take a snap. I have experts coming in who will delve into some of these antifungals as well as the surgical aspects of this management. Okay. And the amphotericin B, I will just tell one word. The things in green are evidence-based. So anything which is green on the screen is evidence-based. Anything which is red is yet to be proven, okay? So all greens have to be done. No matter you are resource poor or resourceful center, do them. Prognosis is generally poor, but variable. Late diagnosis, poor prognosis. Extensive spread, poor prognosis. All-cause mortality, nearly 50%. Mortality rates will depend upon the clinical form, the type of the fungus you detect, the severity of the risk factors, and the use of surgical intervention, how early you bring them and how efficient you do them. Mortality in HIV is 100%. In disseminated mucormycosis, 90%. In rhinocerebral mucormycosis, range is 30 to 85, but the Indian series says about 30 to 50%. Sinus mucormycosis, nearly 50%. Pulmonary mucormycosis, 76%. Cutaneous, 4 to 10%. So the least, because these gentlemen with cutaneous are the most immunocompetent, therefore the mortality is the least here, 4 to 10%. And isolated renal mucormycosis in immunocompetent or immunodeplete patients, mortality can range anywhere around 35%. I think with that, I'll end the presentation, and this is last but one slide. Sir wants to chip in this one. So I tried to incorporate everything that I have learned now in COVID-19 in the last 3 days, I would say. And I have experts dealing with this even longer periods of time. So COVID-19, the starting point is keep a high index of suspicion for this mucormycosis. You may be having diabetic patient, they themselves don't know that they're diabetic. In India, 50% of diabetics don't know that they're diabetic. 25% who are diabetic don't know about their good glycemic control. So this is a very, very sorry state of affairs for diabetes in India. So get an HbA1c done on the day of admission of your patient. Get your first ENT examination done on the first day of admission. Go on for more serial examinations, physical examinations by ENT specialist if you suspect a mucormycosis in your patient. And obviously, there will be risk factors like severe illness, you have an ICU patient requiring mechanical, they are all adding on to the insults. So for your ICU, at least you can apply this. Maybe for the non-ICU segment, you can just be vigilant, but for the ICU, you need to be more proactive. So high index and HbA1 history and examination, physical examination, then risk factors, if you have any of them, then very strict glycemic control. I won't say very strict, but strict means for us anywhere between 150 to 180. I'm not harping on 110 values because in a logistically constrained environment, you don't want to have hypoglycemia in your environments there. You will be having 1 or 2 nurses looking after 20, 30 patients in the ICU. And if you harp on hourly sugar estimations, that may not be possible there. So you have to be a little more liberal. So 150 to 180 is our aim. Try and keep your sugars between these values. Judicious use of steroids. It does not mean no steroids. If there is a patient with respiratory hypoxia, you will have to give steroids to stop the cascade of downward spiral of this patient. But how much steroids? How long you want to give it? What is the style of giving it? How fast should you want to get down? All these things are elements of a judicious steroid use. Okay. Then further on, if you do suspect, then there is a multidisciplinary team which incorporates an ENT, ophthalmologist, microbiologist, a radiologist, a neurosurgeon, an intensivist, an anesthesia, and CVHS person. All of them are a part of your team who will manage these patients. And further on, you have to do direct microscopy, culture, molecular identification, and obviously control the underlying conditions. And aggressive surgical debridement plus systemic antifungal therapy is the hallmark of this therapy. But remember, multiple debridements may have to be done, multiple surgical interventions, multiple theater visits, and multiple CT or MRIs may have to be done in this group of patients. And your care does not stop there. Now, because this is an extended antifungal therapy lasting for weeks, you may have to switch over to an oral forms of the antifungals, and you may have to care for these patients even in the post-COVID period, because a number of patients in COVID-19 are going with steroids in the post-COVID phase as well on tapering regime. So you have to take care of them even in that phase of the illness. I think with that, I'll end this presentation.